G'day and welcome back to another episode of the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here with me today. I hope you're having a fantastic day. This is episode 1158, and in this episode of the Hidden Why podcast, I sit down with Cate Osborn. She's a certified sex educator, author, speaker, and mental health advocate. She has nearly 2 million followers, and she's become a leading voice on ADHD, neurodivergent, sex, and relationships. In this conversation, we explore what ADHD really is and what it isn't, why so many adults are only just discovering it, and how it shapes everything from daily functioning to intimacy and connection. We also dive into Cate's upcoming book, the ADHD Guide, or Field Guide, I should say, for adults, and why so much traditional advice simply doesn't work for our ADHD brains. Really cool conversation. I got a lot out of it, a lot of learnings for me on this topic, and I hope you enjoy it as well. As always, guys, check out the show notes at thehiddenwhy.com. The links for Cate will be there as well, so reach out to her. Grab a copy of the Field Guide, an important conversation today, guys. Let me know what you think. Make comments online there, or reach out to us through Facebook and Instagram. Always open for a conversation there as well. And enjoy this interview. Cheers. G'day, Cate. Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here today.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Whereabouts are you based?
I split my time between Atlanta, Georgia, and Los Angeles, California. So today I'm in Atlanta.
Okay. Why do you split your time between the two?
I do a lot of different stuff. I am an author, I'm a speaker, I'm an actor, I'm a voiceover performer. And so LA has a lot of like the voiceover and the acting stuff. But Atlanta, I moved down here for a job a few years ago. And we bought a house and I love it. I love the area. It's just, we have like land and trees and all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
So I come back to Atlanta to kind of do a little bit of a reset. And I also work at the work at the Renaissance Festival down here. So it's
Renaissance
the Ren Fair
Festival.
season. So that's what I'm doing right now is I'm working down here at the Ren Fair.
Okay, nice. I mean, you're very much a creative,
Yeah, very much so.
but that's not why we're here today.
I,
We're gonna talk about ADHD
yeah, well,
and
I
sex,
mean,
maybe.
yeah. I mean, I guess it's part of I don't know. I find the work that I do to be quite creative.
Yeah,
Mostly just because I think it's a lot about perspective, it's a lot about interpreting, it's a lot about teaching people in a way that feels like accessible and so I don't know, there's a lot of creativity that goes into it, I think.
yeah. So you got very popular on TikTok,
Yeah.
on the topic of ADHD, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you feel like you're giving value there through that channel?
I mean, yes.
Like, I'm just
Yeah.
curious because I sometimes look at these channels and go, are we actually having an impact with purpose, or is it just more fluff and noise that creates more confusion and divergence?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see your perspective. I think it really depends on the approach. One of the things that's really important to me in the work that I do is that I come at it from a very grounded, very research, very academic base. My background is in academia. I'm working on
Okay.
a PhD.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work that I do centers around that kind of idea of how do we make these complicated topics accessible? How do we make these conversations available to the public in a way that is friendly and easy to digest. I do agree that a lot of the conversation around ADHD and neurodivergence in particular can be kind of that less than useful, less than educational fluff. But I work really hard to set myself apart and do my due diligence in terms of how I educate and where I educate.
Good. Yeah.
Uh, I'm across a lot of different platforms, a lot of different places. I do long form content, I do short form content, I do a lot of written work, I do a lot of speaking, a lot of education, so I do a lot of different stuff in a lot of different capacities. So TikTok
You
just
do a lot of
happened to be the
stuff.
place. Yeah, just that happened
How
to
do
be
you
the
keep on
place
top of
where
it all?
how do I keep I'm sorry,
On
what was
top
the
of
question?
doing it? How do you keep on top of it all?
Um, a lot of work. It's a ton of work. It's a ton of work.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
imagine.
I think being a content creator is a really interesting job because I think people see the video, they see the content, but they don't see the back end, the admin, all of that kind of stuff. And so there's a ton of work that goes into it.
Yeah. Well, it's entertainment, isn't it, really, too? Like you will go and watch a show that might go for an hour or 2 hours, but you don't see all the work that goes into actually producing that show, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a
it's
lot like that.
cool. So you've written a book, co-author with Eric Guide, and was there another one there as well?
Yeah, so my co-author, his name is Eric Good.
Good.
We started the Catie and Eric's Infinite Quest podcast together during the pandemic, which took off. And so that was kind of out of that came the book deal. And then our collaborative author is a person by the name of Rennie Dyball, and she is extraordinary. She was sort of the support force and the accessibility that we needed in order to get the book written and create the book as it exists now.
Well done. Well done. Because you got
Thanks.
laid off before COVID or during COVID?
Yeah, so I was actually working at the Georgia Renaissance Festival. I was the entertainment director at the time.
All right.
And like, most people working in the entertainment industry, the
Mm.
whole industry shut down. And so that was when I really started leaning into making content as just kind of a, you know, outlet as a creative thing to
Yeah.
do. And yeah, I got extraordinarily lucky. I think that there was a lot of kind of right place, right time, especially in terms of the conversations that I wanted to have and the things that I was curious about. And so out of that came Catie and Eric's Infinite Quest, and Catieosaurus, and then out of that came my new podcast, which is called Sorry I Missed This. And so yeah, just like one thing kind of led to another, led to another, led to another, led to a best-selling book, and here we are.
You're producing a shitload of content by the sounds of it.
Yeah, yeah, I do
Yeah.
a lot of different stuff in a lot of different capacities. I'm on every platform. I've got a couple of different podcasts, all sorts of different stuff all the time.
Is content king? Like, the more you produce, the better the outcomes? Or is it just about quality, or is it a bit of both?
I think it kind of depends on what you want to do.
Mm.
Um, because this is something that I've genuinely struggled with as a creator, because there are some people who are all about the numbers. There are some people who go into it. If I don't get a million views on every single video, then I've failed.
Yeah.
But there's some days where I'll make a video that gets 1,000 views and I have millions of followers. And that can feel like failure. It can feel like I'm not doing something right or correctly or something like that. But I don't know, the one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got when it came to content creating was, if you were in a room and 800 people were standing there listening to what you said, that would be like a pretty good crowd for most rooms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you start thinking in that capacity, that you're talking to real people who are really actually there on the other end of your phone, sometimes the smaller numbers, 1,200, 1,800, 10,000 views or whatever it might be, that's still a stadium full of people that are listening to what you have to say.
It's huge.
Um,
Yeah.
and and so I try really hard to actually not worry about the number, because I'm much more focused on the education. And over again in the work that I do and what I've seen, that my messages tend to reach the people who need them that day. And so that to me is a much larger marker of success. The emails I get, the letters that I get, the comments that I get around, your content has changed my life, it's saved my relationship. I have letters from people saying, like, you've saved my life. That's incredibly heavy and incredibly
Mm.
significant. And so I don't think worrying about like millions of views or like making the most content, to me, is as important as being a good educator and really sticking to my values when it comes to who I am and what I stand for.
Yeah. Nice. Nicely said. Were the numbers a good measuring tool at the beginning of?
They can be, but the numbers are fake. They're like the points on whose line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because everything is kind of artificially constructed. Like sometimes I get it, sometimes I'll drop a banger and I'm like, okay, like that one went like really, really well. Like people love this video. And that's great. That's always a good feeling. Um, but some of my best work has the lowest views. Some of the videos that I'm the most proud of are the ones that have the lowest views, because they're the ones that are the longest. They're the ones that are the most nuanced. They're the ones that don't have the clickbaity title at the beginning. Um, and so yeah, so I mean, I think you can use analytics, but a lot of it has to do with even like how TikTok works. Like if you link a product in the TikTok shop, you're going to get more views than a video where you don't, you know.
No.
If you mention go follow my podcast, that video is not going to do as well as a video that keeps people on the platform. So a
Yeah.
lot of it is kind of learning how to do the work that you want to do while also navigating the system and sort of like learning how to
Yeah.
game the system as best that works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, smart. What, and this isn't about content creation, but I'm curious, how do you go about creating content? Do you have a particular, I guess, format that you follow, or how do you come up with the ideas of what you're wanting to share? Is it just a thought that you've had and think that's actually something I should share? Like, where does it come
Oh God.
from?
I have terrible habits. I'm the worst content
Really?
creator in the whole world. Yeah, I mean,
Tell us about
a
your
lot of
terrible habits.
people it's I mean so many it's funny. Like I know a lot of content creators and I get this question a lot and I tell people honestly how I do it and I'm met with horror. I'm met with horror and aghastness frequently because most people have like a content calendar, right? Like most people like kind of know like once you start doing this professionally there's like okay on Monday I'm going to post this video, on Tuesday I'm going to post, you know, whatever, like I'm going to do theme days or whatever. I don't do any of that. Like I wake up in the morning and I'm like I don't know, I guess I'm going to talk about this today. And
Okay.
so I really do kind of extemporaneously and spontaneously decide what content I'm going to make that day. And I think in some ways it is a boon because it means that I can stay very on top of the moment. If there's something like funny or something going viral, I don't have to like change the plan to like speak to that. But it also does mean that there's a certain element of spontaneity and like flying by the seat of my pants that I engage with, but I think that actually kind of works
Works for
well with
you.
my ADHD.
Yeah.
It does just mean that if I want to like take a vacation or something like that, I have to really change the way that I'm doing my content, which because I'm also autistic, it can be difficult in terms of like changing the process and like doing something differently. And that's just like uncomfortable and scary for me. So I don't know.
Like a
It's
different
kind of like
environment, you sort of mean? Like when you're at home, you obviously got a certain environment that you're working in, as
it's
opposed to
more
when
of
you're traveling.
it's more of just like I do it the same way. Like I'm very much a creature of habit. And so
Yeah.
it's if I have to suddenly make 4 videos in a day so I can cover myself for a week, you know, or whatever, that feels
Right.
really bad and scary. And I'm like, but what if I choose wrong? Like what if I don't like these videos or you know, whatever. And so a lot of that sort of like planning ahead stuff is stuff that I really struggle with.
Okay. So once you have an idea in the morning, I'm going to
Mhm.
talk about this today. What's the
Okay.
process then?
I pick up my phone and I make the video.
You just do it.
I just
Good
do it.
advice, right?
Um,
Is
right?
there
Great
is there an
advice.
element
Great.
of
I mean,
like
I
perfectionism? I
use
want this to be, right, and record, or do you just
It kind of depends on the video. So like for example, today, right before we started talking, I wanted to make a video about there's this, I don't know if you're a Star Trek person at all, but there's this
a little bit?
episode of Star Trek called Dharmic that is about these like aliens that only speak in allegory and metaphor. And I'm working on a chapter of my new book that is about alexithymia and accessing emotions and how we talk about emotions and how we feel about emotions. And for whatever reason, I was like, oh, like that one episode of Star Trek. And so I thought that would be a good video. And so my process for starting every video is kind of the same. I always go look up the research, right? I always look at some peer reviewed studies. I try to always include at least some kind of peer reviewed journal based evidential study in the content that I make.
Yep.
And then I just kind of talk about it. So today was like really fun because I got to talk about Star Trek, which I've liked since I was a kid, and I was collecting clips and that kind of thing. Some days it's really easy. Some days it's, you know, if I'm making like a more joke video or I have a couple of like one of my more famous kind of series is fun things to do with your burnt out, gifted, and talented submissive brat with a praise kink. And those are kind of like one and done videos. But sometimes it is kind of record, delete, record, delete, record, delete, record, delete, because I just want to make sure that my messaging is clear and that I am precise in my language and how I talk about things. Because the thing that I never want to do is broadly generalize or under educate. So I try to be really careful in how
Yeah.
I say stuff. So,
Top three bits of advice for someone out there going, I'd like to do more of this, but they haven't started yet.
oh my gosh. You don't need fancy equipment.
Yeah.
Just do it. Don't invest before you have to, and you would be surprised at how long the cheap stuff will last before you really need to upgrade. The second thing is figure out a workflow that works for you. There's going to be a lot of different people. If you talk to 10 different content creators, you're going to hear 10 different workflows. Figure out what works for you and what makes you happy. Because if you start resenting it, if you start hating it, if you start having a bad time, you're never going to last.
Mm.
Um, the third thing is that it's a long game. It is a long game. It is outlive, outlast. And you are going to have so many more flops than you are going to have successes. You're
Yes.
going to have so many more failures than you would ever suspect. But if you learn to treat failure as data, if you learn to treat failure as input, rather than a condemnation of the content that you make or the person that you are, it's incredibly useful to fail. I love it when a video flops. I love being able to be like, why did that video do so bad?
Mm.
And dissecting it and learning from that so I can do better next time.
Yeah, good advice. I did have a question off that, but it's just slipped my mind. Your book is the ADHD Field Guide for Adults.
Yes, correct.
Um, Obviously, a condition, ADHD, part of your life. It's a term that
Yes.
gets, it's fairly common around there now. You know, I feel like I have ADHD. I've never been diagnosed, don't plan to. Um, but a kind of, ADHD personality, I would say.
Mhm.
But I don't really know enough about it. And I guess that's why your book is written.
Yeah, well, we wrote the ADHD Field Guide for Adults because there are a lot of people who
Hmm.
are just coming to the conversation. In the past decade, the understanding of ADHD and the scope of ADHD has widened and changed so much. But there is a lot of stigma. There is a lot of misinformation. There is a lot of moralizing, and there is a lot of judgment that goes along with ADHD. And one of the things that I was really surprised to find when we started writing the field guide is that not many books about ADHD are accessible to people with ADHD. They are difficult to read. They are walls of text. They are boring. They're dry. And so, one of the sort of visions that I had for the field guide going in was I wanted to write a book by and for people with ADHD. And so the field guide is unique in that not only is it written and designed to be specifically accessible to ADHD brains, but we also went to the ADHD community, and there are hundreds and hundreds of quotes and stories from people who from all different backgrounds. There are also sections about intersectionality and different identities that don't often get discussed in context with ADHD, because lots and lots of things impact ADHD and your lived experience of ADHD.
Right.
Whether you are a man or a woman impacts ADHD. Your racial background, your religious background, your economic bracket. All of those things are things that impact the way that ADHD can show up in your life. And so we wrote a book that talks about all of them.
Nice. Well done. So, what are some of the stigmas currently around ADHD
I
that you
mean, I
mentioned?
guess the first one is that it's just not real, right? That people with ADHD are just lazy, that we just need to try harder, that we're being over dramatic, that we're, inherently bad people. So that's the first one.
Right.
The second one is that I don't know, that we're all like these like crazed meth addict drug seekers, which is hilarious because if you ask any person with ADHD, one of the hardest things to do is to remember to take our meds if we even have medication. So that's some of it. But a lot of it is just around moralizing around the types of people that we are. Like, we don't care, we're lazy, we're thoughtless, we're flaky, we're bad
Mm.
friends, we're bad partners. And
Wow.
none of those things are true. None of
Yeah.
those things are
I've never really come
always.
across those sort of things about ADHD, but maybe I haven't been deep enough in the conversation about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really kind of, I think, depends on how much you know about ADHD, how much exposure you've had to ADHD. But I read the comment sections, and so I've certainly heard those things before.
That's what I was going to
And
ask
what
you about the comment sections. Like, how do you go with the comments on your posts? Like, you obviously read them?
I do, I read every comment that I get, which is silly because I mean, I read I way too many comments every single day. But I think it's important. I think it's important to understand kind of how people are taking your video, taking the content,
Yeah.
understanding the content. And a lot of it also is that that's also how I engage with my community, because for every mean comment, there's 100 kind and compassionate and thoughtful comments. Um, but one of the things that I think is really interesting about ADHD is that ADHD is often sort of couched as this like whimsical disorder that makes you a little bit disorganized, a little bit running late, and maybe you can't find your keys. But when we actually start to look at how ADHD impacts adults, it's things like alcoholism and eating disorders, gambling addictions, compulsive shopping, being in debt, more car accidents. We tend to live shorter lives. There are all of these really profound and really serious impacts that ADHD can have. But because the conversation so very much focuses on that kind of like whimsical, I can't find my keys and I'm just like a kid messing around in the back of the classroom, a lot of the profundity of the disorder is just simply not talked about and not addressed in a way that I think serves the ADHD population.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of like where I find myself sort of at the nexus of that conversation is, as like a lot of the work that I do is around sex and intimacy and relationships. And I mean, I get comments all the time from people like, I had no idea that ADHD impacts my relationships. I had no idea that ADHD impacts your sex life. And it's like, yeah, dude, like, profoundly.
Right. Right. So how do we remove the stigmas and actually put a definition to ADHD? Like what is ADHD?
Well, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which means that you are born with it. You don't suddenly develop it in the middle of your life.
Right.
And it is ADHD stands for, of course, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And it is kind of a poorly named disorder. A lot of time, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what is particularly interesting about ADHD is that most people with ADHD don't actually have a deficit of attention, which is why I think the name is so shitty. What
Yeah.
we actually have is we have a struggle to point our attention to things that are not stimulating or not interesting, that don't provide dopamine or serotonin, because most of us are dopamine and serotonin deficient.
Right.
And then the hyperactivity disorder part of it, many of us don't externally have hyperactive traits or hyperactive symptoms. Many of us, the hyperactivity happens internally, so we don't necessarily recognize it as hyperactivity. There are some people with ADHD that are not hyperactive at all. And so, even how we talk about ADHD, even the way that ADHD is named, is not really an ample or adequate description of the lived experience of the ADHD community.
Right.
Um, so, that's annoying, right? Um, and so then you start getting into, so what is ADHD? At
Yeah.
its core, ADHD is I mean, it's everything, but it's primarily around executive functioning, and we struggle with executive functioning. Executive functionings are just simply the sort of processes that your brain uses to get you through the day, right? Things like task organization, task management, emotional regulation, where your body is in space, like all of these different things. And we can struggle with all sorts of them. Many people with ADHD also deal with like sleep disorders. We deal with scientifically measurable differences in how we perceive time. So there's just all of these different things that are encompassed by this sort of umbrella term ADHD that can get very 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 broad and very very overwhelming very quickly when you really start to unpack like what actually is ADHD.
Mm, sounds like a lot more to it. What percentage of the population have ADHD?
That's a really good question. The
As,
most recent estimates are between 10 and 20%, but that
mm,
changes quite literally every year. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less.
right.
Sometimes it's like 4%, sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 12%. It just really depends on the study that you're looking at, how you're measuring. Are you measuring only diagnosed people? Are you estimating for those people who like have slipped through the cracks and aren't diagnosed but probably do have it? Are you accounting for comorbidities? One of my favorite trivia facts about ADHD is that it wasn't until 2014 that you could be diagnosed concurrently with ADHD and autism. Prior to that,
Oh,
they basically diagnostic practitioners could only choose one. So you would either get a diagnosis of autism or you would get a diagnosis of ADHD, but there is a huge overlap. There's a massive overlap between ADHD and autism. And so because of that, because of the way that we have specifically created the diagnostic criteria, it often leaves a lot of people out of the conversation. A lot of like women, people of color tend to be underdiagnosed with ADHD. And so the percentage rates of the population are incredibly
right.
difficult to specifically and accurately name.
Yeah, well, if it's close to like 10 to 20%, what you said, that's a lot lower than I would have thought, to be honest.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I would say probably a safe bet is around like 5 to 10% is
yeah,
usually the
wow.
number that I say just to be safe.
Levels of ADHD. Now, this might seem like a really stupid question, but
No such thing.
are there people with higher levels of ADHD or people with more?
Oh, that's a good question. That's not a stupid question. That's a great question.
Hmm.
So a lot of people tend to think about ADHD as this kind of uh like you said, right? Like do you have a lot of ADHD or a little bit of ADHD?
Yeah,
Is your ADHD a 1 or is it a 10?
yeah,
But when we think about ADHD, what is important to remember is that ADHD is a spectrum disorder, which means that if you line up 5 people with ADHD, each of those people with ADHD is going to have certain strengths and certain weaknesses.
right.
If you meet one person with ADHD, you meet one person with ADHD. And so there are people to whom the externalizing factors, the things that you can kind of see, right? The hyperactivity, the fidgeting, the lack of impulse control, that kind of thing. There are some people where that is very visible and you can like look at somebody and be like, that guy has ADHD. There are also a lot of people with ADHD who tend to live more internal, and the struggles and the symptoms that they experience are more internalized and you wouldn't
Right.
be able to necessarily tell. There's also the
Okay.
factor of masking. A lot of people with ADHD are punished and coerced into sort of behaving normally as kids and even as adults. And so sometimes the struggle with ADHD is not one that you're necessarily going to see. But yeah, ADHD impacts everybody differently.
You talk about internal hyperactivity. What do you mean by that? Like, what is an internal hyperactivity?
So internalization versus externalization,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So if you are externally hyperactive, that might look like you're fidgeting constantly, you're, picking at your nails, you're playing with your hair, getting up and down out of your chair 47 times. Internalized hyperactivity can look like racing thoughts. It can look like trouble sleeping. It can look, and this is again where it kind of gets into that, like the stuff that we don't necessarily talk about a lot, but it can look like hypersexuality. It can look like risky decision making, risky behavior taking. That's not a word, but here we are. It can look like compulsive shopping, compulsive gambling. It can look like substance use disorder, because we are internally, our brain is so awake and alive and overstimulated all the time that we are looking for anything that can kind of
Mm,
relieve those racing thoughts and
right.
slow us down and make us feel a little bit more
Interesting.
regulated.
Interesting. Can one person, listening to this today self-diagnose and go, actually, I've got some symptoms there? Like, is that possible?
So the conversation around self-diagnosis in the neurodivergent community is a really interesting one, because there are some proponents of it who say self-diagnosis is absolutely valid. There are some people who talk about self-diagnosis as incredibly dangerous, and I personally fall somewhere in the middle,
Right.
because I think there are a lot of people to whom ADHD symptoms or ADHD traits might seem incredibly familiar. And you might, like you, Lee, you even talked about it, right? You said, like, I don't know if I have ADHD, but I definitely recognize some of the symptoms, some of the traits in my own life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you were then to say, and some of these traits, they're impacting me, they're
Mm,
affecting me, right? Maybe I could stand to manage my time better. Maybe I could stand to organize my office a little bit better, whatever your struggles may be, right? If you Google ADHD time management strategies or ADHD home organization strategies, and those things work for you, you're not taking anything away from anybody. You're not using up any resources, right? And so that type of self-diagnosis, I think, is can be really useful, because regardless of if you have ADHD, if you recognize traits that are making your life more difficult to live, why not use strategies that have been proven effective?
Yeah.
Where self-diagnosis can get you into trouble is that the symptoms and traits of ADHD can also be mimicked by other things, right? So you might be a person who is dealing with anxiety and depression, or bipolar, or OCD, or complex PTSD, or something like that.
Yeah.
And any or all of those can mimic the symptoms of ADHD. And so if you self-diagnose and say, I only have ADHD and that is what I have, and so I'm going to choose to only use these symptoms and strategies, sometimes that can be harmful, because what may actually benefit you is addressing the anxiety, or addressing the depression, or the OCD, or whatever it may be. And in the ADHD sort of diagnostic umbrella, there's a huge overlap between like the comorbidities of depression, anxiety. A lot of people with ADHD also have like OCD traits. There tends to be more overlap in some of these other issues.
Right.
And so self-diagnosis, I think, is incredibly valuable. It can be incredibly affirming. It can be so relieving to just finally know that you are not the only person who is struggling with these things, and not feeling so very alone. But it's also really important to remember that if you are like seeking medication, if you are seeking supports, if you are seeking like a therapeutic modality, it may be useful to be seen by a practitioner who can diagnose you more accurately.
Okay. So that's the best way to get a more accurate diagnosis, is to see a practitioner.
Yeah, so the only way to
Yeah.
sort of officially get a diagnosis is to, see a mental health practitioner.
Right.
And it tends to vary depending on where you live. So in some places you can get diagnosed by a therapist, in some places you can't. In some places it's only like a medical doctor, in some places, you can get diagnosed by a psychiatrist. It really depends on your country of origin, where you're
Yeah.
living, how your insurance, if you're in America, and the nightmare that is our insurance situation, all of that kind of stuff. So it really depends. So
Yeah.
your
Okay.
best bet is to always just sort of look up, ADHD screening, diagnosis, my area. That's the best way to do it.
So not necessarily doing an online quiz.
No, I mean, again, online
I think they
quizzes
exist,
are
don't they?
great to provide, the sort of foundational thing. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for like the official diagnosis.
So we talk about like ADHD and time management, disorganization, OCD, things off that as well.
Mhm.
Are there people with ADHD that are more highly functioning?
Yeah. So I the first thing that I would say is that in just a moment of learning opportunity here.
Please.
So high functioning versus low functioning language is not necessarily as useful as supports, right? So if you might be called low functioning, but what you actually need is more support. So you have higher support needs as opposed to being low functioning, right? So we can kind of replace that language. So when we talk about high support needs versus low support needs, yes, absolutely. There are some people with ADHD who have ADHD, and it impacts them minimally. There are some people with ADHD to whom it is absolutely debilitating, and it impacts every part of their life.
Right.
And because, again, that kind of idea of there's no such thing as like ADHD level 1, ADHD level 10, what it is a spectrum. And that spectrum is kind of broken down around those executive functions. And so, like, for example, there are people with ADHD who are aces, who are incredibly good at
Mm.
being on time. There are people with ADHD who never lose anything ever. But that takes an immense amount of work. That takes a very carefully, meticulously crafted system and structure of operating that they have honed over years and years and years of
Right.
struggling with time
Mm.
management, right? And like whatever the executive function or whatever the thing is that you want to talk about, for every person with ADHD like me who's like great at communicating, there are people who are really bad at it. For every person who is great at regulating their emotion, there are people who are terrible at regulating them. And so it's those support needs, and the functionality, in how it shows up in your
Mm.
life, that is just so variable dependent on the person.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Okay. And so what methods do you, I mean, are there, I guess methods will differ for everyone depending on your levels, etc., where you are on the spectrum, but are there things we can do with ADHD to help us manage it daily?
Yeah. The biggest thing is creating systems and structures that work for you. And this is where people get really annoyed with me because they'll be like, Kate, like, so what do I do? I'm like, well, you got to build a system and structure that works for you. And they go, great. What is it? I'm like, I don't know. You have to figure that out for yourself.
Right.
Because that's really the thing, is that, there are 10 billion, tips, tricks, and suggestion lists
Yeah.
online. But the real truth is that you are the person who understands how you move through the day, right? You are the person who understands what you need in order to accomplish the tasks that you have set out for you.
Yeah.
Um, and so the best suggestion that I can give when it comes to creating systems and structures is that you never want there to be speed bumps, because one of the hardest things for most people with ADHD is task initiation, switching from one task to
Hmm.
another and then starting the task. And
Yeah.
something as simple as opening a
Interesting.
door or walking into another room, that can be the difference between that task is getting done or that task is not getting done until 2 weeks from now. And so I like to kind of think of setting up your day as a slip and slide. Like if you can just jump on the slip and slide with no bumps and kind of just move from activity, from task to task to task, with minimal interruptions, with minimal distractions, that is often much easier than trying to like navigate this sort of like very speed bumpy, I have to stop and start and stop and start and be interrupted and be interrupted and all of these different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, like a lot of it again, it really surrounds taking an inventory of that spectrum, right, of your executive functioning. Like where are your weaknesses, where are the things that you are strong at,
Hmm.
and building systems and structures around those supports that you need higher supports, you need lower supports in some areas.
Yeah. 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 Nice. And it makes sense. I mean, I think system and structures for anyone is really quite ideal, but more so
Yeah.
for people with ADHD, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing that is important to say is that ADHD has a 100% failure rate. No matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you work, there is going to be a day where, for whatever reason, through some random act of God, the cat knocks the phone off the charger, or the power goes out, or whatever. There's going to be a day where your system fails and you're running late or something else happens. Um, and so, kind of the point of the book and most of the work that I do
Hmm.
is that people with ADHD are told over and over and over again that we are wrong, that we are bad, that we are lazy, that we just need to try harder, we just need to apply ourselves. And it is very rare that we are taught intentionally to give ourselves grace, to give ourselves compassion, to give ourselves kindness. And that, I think, is one of the best systems and structures that you can integrate into your life as a person with ADHD, is being patient with yourself, is being kind with yourself, is accepting the fact that at some point you're going to get bored of the system that you built. And
Hmm.
then when that happens, that system is going to be ineffectual and it's no longer going to work. And you're going to have to change up the system just for the sheer novelty of having a system that you are willing and able to use.
That's
And we can
frustrating.
get, yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. And we can carry a lot of guilt and a lot of shame around that, like a lot of guilt around, why can't I just stick to something? Why can't I just like pick the thing that works and stick with it? And the answer is, it is not your fault. It is because that is how your brain works. That is how your brain interprets stimulus. That is how your brain interprets feedback. At some point, everything is going to cease to be novel, is going to cease to be interesting. And when that happens, we have to operate with kindness and compassion and patience rather than punitive and antagonistic behavior towards ourselves.
I guess that's where the depression or anxiety would stem from when you get to that point and you're not sure on how to navigate it.
Yeah, we see that a lot. A lot of the depression and anxiety that comes with ADHD, it often comes from that kind of why can't I just do anything, right and correctly. A
Lack
lot
of
of it
kindness,
comes
patience,
from,
and compassion.
yeah, exactly. A lot of it comes from that.
How do you, how would you encourage someone to practice patience, kindness, and compassion with themselves? Um, for me, it's very difficult.
Why do you
I
think
often
that
say I
is?
have no patience,
Yeah. Why
and I
not?
think I have no patience for myself more so than
Why?
anything because I just want things done. I want to get to the
Why?
next thing.
Why?
Why? Yeah, why? I don't know. Because it's
That's where you got to
exciting.
start.
It's
Is it's
exciting.
because it's exciting to get to the next thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So if it's exciting to get to the next thing, what happens if you slow down before you get to the next thing? Does that feel better or worse?
Oh, I feel pissed off because I'm not there.
Yeah. So that's a place where we need to give ourselves a little bit of kindness, right?
Yeah.
It's like that, right? And so like a
It's
lot of the
talking about
process
it.
is about like really and truly, like brutally, like raw, rip your own heart and soul open. And it's hard work. It's difficult work. It is
Hmm.
slow work. It is meticulous work. But a lot of times we really have to unpack what we have been taught and what we believe about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if you rush and you hate waiting and you hate getting to the next thing, perhaps that comes from a place of feeling like you always have to do more or because
Yeah.
or you're not doing enough. Perhaps it comes from a place of you were told that you could always do better. Like maybe, you got an A-, you're supposed to get an A+, right? These messages don't come from the ether. They're absorbed through our lives. So, one of the best things you can do when you start really intentionally giving yourself kindness and compassion is to really sit down and interrogate the beliefs that you hold and
Yeah.
and how you got there and why you got there. And that can be a really uncomfortable and really difficult process. But if you cannot be honest with yourself, if you cannot be vulnerably raw with yourself, if you can't advocate for your own wants and needs and desires, then how can you ever honor yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. So with that self-interrogation, would you sit down and would you journal about it, or would you just sit there with a coffee and think about it? Like, what's a good
It
interrogation process there? Like,
it really depends. For some
without
people,
becoming
journaling,
impatient and going, "Fuck, okay, I've done enough of this now. I'm moving
right? Like
on."
I'm bored.
Yeah.
A lot of different ways. Journaling can be incredibly effective. Like mindfulness exercises can be really useful. Some
Hmm.
people, like a therapist who can like really sort of like talk you through these conversations, that can be really good. I'm not a huge fan of AI, but I have heard about a lot of people having really great like conversations
Yeah.
just with different
Interesting.
AI, in terms of like, help me unpack this, help me, kind of like figure this out. It really kind of depends on what your style is. Like for me, I need movement. I need somatic musculature like activation in order to process. And so journaling doesn't work for me. What
Yeah.
works for me is going to the gym and throwing around like a bunch of really heavy weights while I think about a problem that I'm trying to solve.
Hmm.
For some people it's like running or going for a jog or whatever. But there's a lot of evidence to support that most people with ADHD, and again, broad generalization, like
Yeah. Yeah.
what works for
Yeah.
me may not work for you.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of research to support that just like sitting and journaling is never going to be as effective as somatic movement, because that is just kind of how our bodies
Hmm.
tend to process things, because we tend to be more externalizing, sort of like bottom up processors.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good advice. You talk about sex and relationships as it relates to ADHD or people with ADHD a
I
lot.
sure do.
What started that conversation?
Spite.
Dare I ask?
No, I
Spite.
mean spite. The answer is spite. I don't know. My relationship to sex and intimacy is a very interesting one. I grew up in an incredibly conservative religious home where, conversations around sex and intimacy were very shame based, were very sin based, were very you're inherently broken and bad person for thinking sexual thoughts, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well.
Um, And then as I started learning more about ADHD, as I started learning more about the impact that ADHD has and like how ADHD works in the brain and in the body, I also started learning a lot about like hormones and how like the menstrual cycle impacts ADHD and libido and desire and that kind of thing. And I kept coming to this point where I would go, surely there must be more information on this. Surely someone must have researched this. And then I would go and I would feel like a crazy person because I couldn't find any of the research.
No.
And so I said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to do it then. And so then I started doing it, and now it's now. And so yeah, so most my journey into kind of the very specific niche of what I do came from frustration. It came from anger. It came from being really frustrated and disappointed that conversations around neurodivergence and disability are not part of the sex ed curriculum, and that there's this sort of idea that disabled people are inherently not sexual beings. Like we couldn't possibly want to have sex. You use a wheelchair. What do you mean you want to have sex? Like that kind of stuff. Um, and just so many of those conversations were so just like deeply frustrating to me because they're obviously not true. And so I just said, well, the bigger my platform gets, the more opportunity I have to talk to people. And so that's what I do.
Yeah, okay. And what can we learn from you around sex, people with ADHD and sex and relationships?
Oh my God, Lee, how long do you have?
5 minutes.
I 5 minutes. Great. Okay. Um, I mean, I guess the biggest thing is that ADHD impacts sex. The same, like your brain, the example that I always use is that your brain does not distinguish between the task of making a sandwich and the task of making or making love, right? And so at any point, when you look at executive function, when you look at emotional dysregulation, when you look at all of the different ways that ADHD impacts the way that you navigate through the world, it doesn't magically turn off when you walk into the bedroom. Sex is a series of tasks. Getting in the mood requires a brain and body connection that many, many people with ADHD struggle to have.
Mm,
Many people with ADHD experience issues around like erectile dysfunction and arousal issues. We struggle with orgasming. We struggle with just staying in the right headspace. And so much of it just has to do with how our brain and bodies interpret signals, right?
right. Yeah.
Like
Systems and structure for the bedroom.
systems and structures for the bedroom.
Keeping
Like
things
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, the very specific intersection of what I study is kink, BDSM, and how it intersects with neurodivergence and disability. And kink and BDSM is an incredible toolkit for people who struggle with like
When you say
headspace.
kink and BDSM, what are we talking about?
Kink and BDSM, Lee. I don't know. I mean, just like I don't even know how to answer that question. I mean, when I talk about kink, I talk about things like power dynamics. I'm talking about very specifically negotiated consent. I'm talking about play inside a safe
Yeah.
container. I'm talking about activities that are like, quote unquote kinky.
Yep.
But how and what you consider kinky is again very like person to person. You put two kinky people next to each other, they're gonna like two very different things.
Yes, yes, yes. Not mainstream then. Not vanilla.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also, I don't know, you can also like Uno reverse it. And for some people, being very vanilla and mainstream is the kink, it's just, it really depends on what you're into.
Well, it is a kink. Okay, there you go. Um, I had one more question. What would you, for people without ADHD, what message would you like to leave with those people who potentially won't be picking up your book about ADHD?
I hope you do, especially if you have a partner or someone in your life that you love, because part of the book is just helping you understand why that person is the way that they are. If you don't
Yeah.
know anybody in your life with ADHD, you're wrong. You do. Um, but the most important thing to just think about is how we talk about ADHD, how we couch conversations around
Right.
ADHD in terms of this sort of moralistic, stigmatized, judgmental stuff. People with ADHD are trying. We are not flaky. We don't just need to buy another planner. We don't need to just apply ourselves. Um, I wish I could articulate just how truly difficult it is sometimes to live in my brain and in my body. And I think regardless of whether or not we're talking about ADHD or just being a good human, like blanket statement stop, I think one of the most powerful things you can do is just to practice radical empathy and radical compassion. Treat others the way that you would want to be treated, extend patience, extend generosity, extend compassion. Because as trite as it sounds, like you really truly never know how, like what someone else is going through. And you may not ever understand how truly difficult it was for me to show up on time, showered, in clean clothes, prepared and ready to go for my day. And for some people, that effort is so much more than you will ever understand.
Yeah. Well, you did well today, despite my confusion with the 7 p.m. start.
That's all right. It happens to the best of us.
You did well. The book is out, the ADHD Field Guide for Adults. The link will be in the show notes for The Hidden Why, so check out this episode at thehiddenwhy.com. And Kate, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Been a pleasure. Guys, check it out at thehiddenwhy.com. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Hope that was all right.
Did you enjoy it?
Where from whence have you come? Did you come from
Whence have
Simon
you
and
come?
Schuster?
Good question. My team handles
I'm
it,
just
so I'm
trying to
not
figure out
sure.
how I got hooked up with you. I don't know. I just didn't know. No, it's fine. No, it was great. Thank you so much. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
my
it.
team might have reached out to you directly, or maybe it came
Oh, sure.
through your publisher. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I just wasn't sure. But yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time.
Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a good one. It was nice
You
to meet
too.
you.
You too.
Bye.
Catch up. Okay, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in this week to this interview. I hope you enjoyed the conversation we had. Make sure you check it out at thehiddenwhy.com for the show notes and links to our guest. And if you have any comments, any suggestions for the show, please make sure you reach out as well. Also, would like to just ask a favor. If you do like what you're listening to, if you love what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe, whether you're listening to this on iTunes, wherever it might be. Subscribe to the podcast so you can stay up to date with all the latest episodes and some exciting changes happening this year at The Hidden Why, including the launch of our new website, which will be updated very soon. So watch this space for that, guys. And once again, live more fully, have more meaning, find more joy. We'll see you around the next interview.